When I was a child, my family had a tradition on Easter weekend to watch two movies. The King of Kings with Jeffrey Hunter, which was all about the life of Jesus, and the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, about the story of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. Who could ever forget the dramatic scenes of Moses standing on the shore of the Red Sea, raising his staff as God parted the waters? Or the scene on Mount Sinai, when the finger of God carved the Ten Commandments onto the stone tablets. Moses has held a fascination with believers for millennia. In modern times, the imagery of Moses leading the Israelites from slavery to freedom into the Promised Land served as a metaphor during our own American Revolution. And abolitionists invoked the same theme as they worked to liberate a multitude from chattel slavery. Moses even appears on our Supreme Court building, along with other representations of the rule of law. Most significant is Jesus' transfiguration, when 3 of his disciples had the privilege to see a glimpse of Jesus in his heavenly glory. And 2 men stood with Jesus, Elijah, the prince of the prophets, and Moses, the great liberator to whom God gave the law. Join me as we explore the life and significance of Moses, one of the great heroes of the biblical story of salvation, and learn how once again God worked through an ordinary man, complete with the man's strengths and weaknesses, to achieve miraculous things. Great and Mighty Moses, our next edition of Heroes with Feet of Clay. Great and mighty Moses had very humble beginnings. However, this quickly changed. He was born a son of Hebrew slaves in Egypt. Hundreds of years earlier, the families of Jacob migrated to Egypt to escape famine. At first, it seemed like a promising idea at the time, since Joseph had prospered there. But as time went by, the Hebrew people grew in number to such an extent that the Egyptians, who had forgotten Joseph, grew fearful that these Hebrews would take over, and so they made them slaves. To make matters worse, Pharaoh decided to murder all the newborn male Hebrew children. So Moses' mother, desperate to save her son, hid him as best she was able, but eventually she had to act. She put him in a watertight basket and placed him in the Nile River, and the basket floated down the river to where the Pharaoh's daughter was bathing. Then God caused the first great miracle in the life of Moses. We should keep in mind that the story of the Exodus was a battle between the God of the Hebrews and the phony gods of the Egyptians, acted out by their respective servants, Moses and Pharaoh. And in the end, there was no contest. Pharaoh was like a plaything in the hands of the God of the Hebrews. Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby and took him in, and prophetically named him Moses, which sounds like the Hebrew word to draw out and the Egyptian word for son. So, Moses was not only himself the son who was drawn out of the water, but who would be the one to later draw out of the water of the Red Sea a son for God, that is, the nation of Israel. Now, providentially, Pharaoh's daughter engages Moses' own mother to help raise him, and in Pharaoh's own palace. Think on it now. Pharaoh's family raised the very deliverer of the Hebrew slaves right under Pharaoh's nose. Moses rose through the ranks to a position of prominence. He learned about the inner workings of the palace and the strength of the army. God placed Moses right where he needed to be to prepare him for the great miracle of liberation for God's people. Moses knew his heritage. and he watched with sorrow the suffering of his people. However, there was nothing he could do about it. Pharaoh was never going to let up on the Hebrews or free them. Well, one day, Moses' pent-up sorrow for his people let loose. He saw an Egyptian severely beating a Hebrew slave, and Moses' rage got the better of him, and he struck out at the Egyptian and killed him. Well, Moses buried the man, trying to hide his crime, but someone witnessed what Moses had done. Well, what do you do when the jig is up? You skip town. And so rather than going back to face the music, Moses decided that he had to flee. Moses wound up in the land of Midian, and in arrow Flynn-like manner, he protected the flocks and the daughters of a Midianite, who not only took Moses in, but let him settle down to live the life of a shepherd. Moses married one of the man's daughters, started a family, and it seemed like Moses would live happily ever after. Moses may have given up hope of ever seeing his people again, but God had other plans. In fact, it had been God's plan all along. How often do we think our life course is set, only to find out that God has something vastly different in mind? He will intervene in our lives, change our direction, and put things on our calendars without consulting us first. The best thing to do is to respond in the affirmative to what God calls us to do, as Mary and Joseph did. But how often do we resist because it doesn't always suit our preferences? Well, one day, Moses was going about his business when he saw something absolutely amazing. And this vision would intrude in on his comfortable, quiet life forever. Moses' real purpose in life was about to commence. And he was by then a senior citizen, even more so than me. Moses saw a bush that was on fire, but the branches were not being consumed by the fire. And then a voice came from the bush and told him to remove his shoes, for he was on holy ground. It was the voice of God. And God told Moses that he was well aware of the suffering of the Hebrews, and that he was sending Moses back to Egypt to tell Pharaoh to free those hundreds of thousands of Hebrews. Say what? Come again? You heard me, says God. Go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. If you will recall, when Jesus called his disciples, to their credit, they immediately followed him. I'll make you become fishers of men, he said, and off with Jesus they went. Moses was much more hesitant. He had to think about it. And, well, let's talk about this for a minute. You want me to do what? He knew Pharaoh was no fool. He was not going to give up a large part of his workforce quite so easily. And you want me to just walk in there and tell Pharaoh to let them go, just like that? That is exactly what I'm saying, says God. Well, humanly speaking, you can see why Moses might hesitate. It seemed like an impossible task. Ever have one of those in your life? Well, Moses offered his first objection. Nobody's going to listen to me. Who am I? He has a point. Well, in effect, God responded with, don't worry about it. I will go with you, and I will demonstrate my power. Isn't that always the case? And isn't that also often our first excuse when God calls us to do something that, truth be told, we really don't want to do? I can't do that. Well, God's answer is, I know, but I can. Trust in me, not in yourself. Well, that excuse didn't work, so Moses tried another one. Second objection. They're going to think I'm crazy. If I say that the God of their ancestors sent me, they're going to want to know, well, what's your name? Names in the Bible often mean something, revealing something about the person named. Remember how Pharaoh's daughter named Moses? But God told Moses that no one could define him by a name. No name would do him justice. So God told Moses, I am who I am, which can also mean I will be who I will be. Tell them, I am sent you. Then God assured Moses again that the people would listen and would leave Egypt fully provisioned. But Moses wasn't done yet. Third objection. God's patience is amazing. They still aren't going to listen to me simply because I said you sent me. They're not going to take my word for it. Well, seeing is believing. So God showed Moses how to do some really cool stuff with his staff. Throw it down on the ground. And Moses did as God told him, and the staff turned into a serpent. Now, grab it by the tail, just like the swamp people on TV. And as he did so, the serpent turned back into his staff. Wow, that ought to do it. It appears that Moses is not going to get out of this. What do you think? But still, he tries one more time. By the way, a word of advice. There's no use trying to argue with God. He always has a comeback. Fourth objection. If you expect me to speak before Pharaoh, this is going to take a powerful speaker. This is a lost cause already because you know me, I'm no Billy Graham. No problem, says God. I'll send your brother Aaron with you. He has the gift of gab, and he will speak for you. Well, friends, Moses finally gives in, and God gets his way. No surprise there, God always does. Moses will go to Egypt. And praise God that he always gets his way. He sees a comprehensive picture we are not capable of seeing. His ways are always the best way. And even if we cannot see it, we do not always understand God's ways or know his purpose. But the only way we can be at peace is if, in the midst of challenges, especially in the midst of challenges, we trust that he knows what he is doing and is working out his perfect purpose. So the great mighty Moses worked for the bad guys, the Egyptians. Moses murdered a guy and tried to cover it up, and resisted God's call for the greatest adventure and purpose of his life, full of doubts and fears. What we are seeing all through this series is that people, such as the great and mighty Moses, are not great and mighty in themselves, but rather they are heroes they became because of what God accomplished through them. These are ordinary people, just like us, whom God used for his purpose in mighty ways. We are not all called to be a Moses, but we are all called to be what God wants us to be and to do in our own sphere of influence. Who knows what God will call us to do and when he will choose to issue that call? God knows and will tell us in his own good time. Well, next time, we will see just what God did accomplish through this man, Moses, a man who no doubt assumed that his life story was essentially already written. But in fact, it had only just begun. See you next time. Shalom.
Images for Heroes with Feet of Clay are provided by Kingstone Comics.
The best-selling book of all time. Now, the most complete graphic adaptation of all time. Action, adventure, romance, doctrine, history, the future. The Kingstone Bible. Own it today.
The Kingstone Bible and Kingstone Comics, available at the First Church Book Center or online at kingstone.co.